Thank you all so much. How many of you have seen a David Hare film or play or series? Just look at that. That's amazing. That's most people. David, one of the things that you've written in your book is that you'd never, I mean, the High Commissioner talked about words, but you've written that you'll never ever write another word if you didn't have anything to say, and you'll never write another word only for money.
That's the contract, I promise you. I won't ever write anything under my name that I don't think is really important. And I won't write for money. And I do, people think I'm incredibly privileged to have this point of view, but young writers to whom I say this, when they then follow these two rules, it's extraordinary how they do make a living. And they make a much better living often than the people who write for money. And I don't know, but if people can tell the difference, the public can tell the difference, whether you're writing from the heart of what you really want to say. And so this prescription, for me, has always worked. If it doesn't work for you, don't blame me.
Your first play, when you began writing your first play, was this sort of a bolt of thunder, lightning? What happened? Was there a violation that you had to just sit down and write?
No, I was running an agitprop theatre company which went around the country taking plays to places where plays were not normally done. Prisons, army camps, student canteens. I would happily have performed a play in here. I would happily have come to your living room and performed in your living room if you paid the money for the company to appear. We would go anywhere and put plays on. I was the director of this company and had never thought to write until on a Wednesday another writer rang me to say that the play that he was due to deliver on the Monday he had not begun and was not going to deliver. So I had to write a play in 3 days. It was only an hour long. It was very bad. But when the actors held the pages in their hands, I could see that they were just thinking, yeah, I can say this, I can say this, I can say this and not sound completely stupid. And this sounds to me like dialogue. And so I realized I had a gift. And the gift was for writing for dialogue. It took me much longer to learn how to write plays. That's a different thing. But if you can't write dialogue, it's like being a painter. If you can't actually paint, there's nothing you just have to have a basic technique. Hands and feet, I think it's called by artists. You have to be able to do hands and feet. I think as a playwright, you have to be able to do jokes. If you can't do jokes, you probably... it's very hard to think of a major playwright who doesn't do jokes. They just do.
And this writing of dialogue sort of set you in place not just for writing a play, but also series and film and everything that comes along.
Yeah, but I had to learn everything, and I learnt, I think, with fantastic precociousness. As I explain in the book we're talking about is The Blue Touch Paper, which is a memoir of my life up to the age of 30. I was lucky enough, being born in 1947 and then growing up in the 1960s, to be entrusted fantastically early with unbelievably positions for which people would now wait years. We have to remember Peter Brook, who became the most famous theatre director of his time, was director of productions at the Royal Opera House at the age of 23. Peter Hall ran the Royal Shakespeare Company at the age of 27. I was literary manager of the Royal Court Theatre at the age of 21. And that was because nobody else wanted the job. It was extremely badly paid. It was 3 days a week. And there was no demand to work in that world. There weren't other people asking to work in that world. And so I was given that job, and I was working at the National Theatre, adapting a play with Paul Schofield and Joan Playwright, produced by Laurence Olivier, when I was 23. And I beg now people who run theatres to allow the young to speak, because the young have things to say that are different from what people of my age have to say. And now they have to form an orderly queue, as though the British theatre were the civil service. And you hear this terrible phrase that artistic directors use. They say, oh, I think he or she deserves a main stage production, as if it were the civil service. I certainly never deserved a main stage production. I just got one. And then I did what I could and learnt by doing it. And I do think our theatre is very middle-aged, old, because the young are not allowed in because of the queue of people who now want to work in the arts, which luckily didn't exist when I started.
Talking about deserving main stage productions, when the National Theatre first opened, you were going to be on the main stage, and yet you were not ready on that opening night. And you said to your actors, let's hold the play for a second and not open tonight because the machinery isn't working. But then the director of the National came and sort of convinced the actors that they should get on there and get on with their job.
Well, anyone who's ever visited that concrete building on the South Bank can only imagine the chaos of opening that building, which gave nearly everybody who was involved in it a nervous breakdown. I mean, there were people, literally, the production manager was taken to hospital, a gibbering wreck, because when we
And
first...
operated on his piles, I think, at that point, on his hemorrhoids.
Yeah, he had to have an operation in the most unfortunate place as a result of the tension of trying to open the South Bank. And I always have a little sort of murmur of memory for poor Martin and what he underwent in order to get the theatre open. But it was no more than everyone underwent. It was just a hideously protracted and difficult business. But I think that, and you know, I was due to preview a play that I was directing. I was directing the first play to originate in the National Theatre. Otherwise, they transferred the repertory from the Old Vic. And it was a play of Howard Brenton's. And we just simply weren't ready. But Peter Hall persuaded me to open it even though we weren't ready, which was a chaotic thing to do. But he'd reached the stage where he believed that unless something happened on that stage, nothing would ever happen on that stage. And in a way, he was right to be as ruthless as he was with all the people who worked with him.
And critics, every cut, does it hurt you to the bone?
It used to. Because it used to think, I sort of quickly understood that if you want to be a playwright, there are 4 things you need. First of all, you need actors who want to play in your work, and that's not nothing. That's very, very important. You need producers who want to put your play on. You want the public to come and see the play. Those are the 3 things. And the 4th thing you would like is for the critics to approve of you in order to get the public to come. But I quickly was lucky enough to realize that the 3rd of those, the critics, are actually the least important of the 4. And with Plenty, which was my play at the National Theatre, the first sort of big play I had at the National Theatre, it got very poor reviews. In fact, very mixed reviews, I think it would be fair to say. And was very, very violently attacked by people who really did not like this kind of thing and felt that it is not the kind of thing the National Theatre should be doing. But the success of that play was entirely created by its audience and by Peter Hall nurturing it and playing it over a 9-month period, just 2 or 3 times a week, and that way nurturing it and looking after it. And he famously said of Plenty, the board asked Peter Hall to take Plenty off because it was playing to 30 or 40%. And Peter Hall said, if we can't nurture work we believe in, what is the point of a National Theatre? And that little fight was won very, very early in 1978 over Plenty. And he tended it, for which I'm eternally grateful. But I wish I felt that that spirit still survived in the British theatre today. Plays are whisked off pretty fast when they don't immediately attract audiences. And yet the history of post-war theatre is that everything that is of any significance takes a long time to root. Waiting for Godot took a very long time to root. Look Back in Anger took a long time to root. The Birthday Party, Harold Pinter's first play, closed in 5 days. It opened on Tuesday and closed on Saturday, and is now regarded as a great classic. So it's almost a mark of an important play that it will be ahead of public taste, not behind public taste.
Not every play transfers as brilliantly as from its origins. So say, when you transferred from National to, say, West End, not everything sort of transfers in a happy way.
No. I've had flops. And flops, certainly on Broadway in the old days, used to be really... I think there's a restaurant, Joe Allen's, doesn't it, which has posters of all Broadway's most famous flops. And I always go there with a slight tremor, thinking, oh my God, is mine going to be there? But I have had a play that was a huge success at the National Theatre, The Secret Rapture, in Howard Davis's wonderful production. And as soon as I presented my own production on Broadway, it flopped in 10 days. And really closing in 10 days is, it's a learning experience, I would say. It teaches you a lot.
Going back to your childhood, David, it was one of your English teachers that really sort of nurtured you. You were talking about nurturing.
Not English teacher. I was lucky enough, I was a scholarship boy. So I came from a lower middle class background, semi-detached. I wouldn't have had the money, my parents wouldn't have had the money to give me a private education. But I won scholarships everywhere. And that was a time, again, I was very lucky that it was a time of comparative social mobility, which again is something that is more rigid now than it was when I was young. And so I went to a private school, Lancing College. And Lancing was an Anglican foundation, but it was on the cusp of change, just as Britain was on the cusp of change. And we had a very inspiring French teacher called Harry Guest, who also taught Christopher Hampton and also taught Tim Rice. All three of us were at school together. We're all roughly contemporaries. And all three of us were inspired by... Harry would just give me a reading list and say, this is not for your work, just for your general education. Will you go home and read these books? And it meant that when, at the end of my schooling, the Sunday Times had a list of the 100 best books of the century, I'd read 46 of them. And I was only 17. And I'd read 46 of them because I'd had this great teacher telling me, go home in the holidays, don't waste your time in the holidays, spend your time reading. And an inspiring teacher like that, as everybody in this audience knows, can transform your life. And Harry did for all of us, and for Christopher even more than me, because he taught French and German, and Christopher went on and studied French and German and is now by far and away the best adapter of French work in the British theatre by miles and miles.
You in fact you acknowledge Arts Council and you acknowledge the education process in the UK for sort of standing by you and supporting you when you needed them both.
I think that I remember very clearly at the end of the 1980s, Peter Hall, who was older than me, and he was probably born, I guess Peter was born in 1930. And at the end of Margaret Thatcher's years, 1992, he said to me, the great experiment is over. And I said, what do you mean by the great experiment? And he said, the great experiment was that the state would take responsibility for the citizens. And the state would allow working class kids like Peter Hall to go to Cambridge. The state would provide a decent level of social security and support. The National Health Service would be vital and well run and properly financed. The educational system would be fair so that state schools could be as good as private schools. And the arts would be subsidized. Libraries would be subsidized, art galleries would be subsidized. And they would be subsidized at a level that freed them from commercial consideration. And I know Peter felt that his life had completely coincided with that experiment, and he was lucky enough to live through it. And I don't think anybody today feels that the state looks after its citizens with the same benign generosity that the Arts Council, which is an organisation which is attacked all the time and has always been under a great deal of criticism, but the principle of the Arts Council and how well it was run in the first 20 years, it's now a shadow, a mockery of itself, a joke, and loathed by most of the people to whom it gives money. And the decline of those state institutions has happened more dramatically in the last 30 years, even since Peter said, you know, the great experiment is over. And the proper financing of the National Health Service or the equality of the educational system is no longer seen as the principal priority of the state, as it once was.
So what is the role of, say, arts councils, be it in Scotland or in England or anywhere? Do they have a role in today's day and age?
Yeah,
So what?
their responsibility is to the art form. The commercial theatre can look after itself. And actually, the commercial theatre since COVID has been absolutely fine. It's doing fine. People are going to musicals and they're going back to plays that are written for commercial reasons. But, you know, I've just written a play called Grace Pervades, which is opening in Bath, I'm happy to say, in 2 weeks' time, with Ralph Fiennes playing Henry Irving, who's the great 19th century actor-manager, and Miranda Raisin playing Ellen Terry, who's the sort of Judi Dench of the 19th century, the greatest actress of her time, and a wonderful woman like Judi Dench. And it's about that moment at which there might have been a national theatre, and there was first a movement started by Granville Barker and Bernard Shaw in 1900, which said theatre will only develop as an art form if the commercial pressure is taken off it. So, of course, the idea of a subsidised theatre and a repertory theatre was that, yes, commercial theatre would continue and be as good fun and as various and vital and important as it has always been in Britain. But meanwhile, there would be people who were dedicated to the advancement of the art form itself. That distinction has become much more blurred in the last 20 or 30 years. And I don't believe there are any people at the Arts Council left who feel dedicated to what Granville Barker and Bernard Shaw and Jenny Lee and those idealists thought the Arts Council was for.
And yet in those early years when you supported the National Theatre, you were seen to have betrayed the cause and you were called a betrayer.
Oh yeah, it was a big issue that those of us who were on the left and who worked in fringe theatre should on no account go and work in the National Theatre. Why would you want to go and work in an establishment theatre? And to which Howard Brenton and I, who were the two principal playwrights who went to work there, said, and Harold Pinter indeed, we all just said, well, of course it will be a boring establishment theatre if we don't work there. But if we work there, it won't be a boring establishment theatre. And it was true that whatever we wanted to say, we were supported by the artistic directors. First Peter Hall, first Richard Hare, Nick Heitner. I never had a censorship problem. I never had anyone telling me what to write. People used to say to me, how can you work at the National Theatre? Surely they must be on your case all the time, telling you you can't say this, you can't say that. The board, yes. The board tried to shut down a couple of my plays, but Peter Hall, Richard Hare, these people were heroic individuals who defended the writer, defended the playwright. And, Richard Hare certainly tried to resign over an Alan Bennett play, which the board of the National Theatre didn't want. And Peter Hall threatened to resign over a play of mine that the board of the theatre didn't want. But there was a time of very strong people standing up for writers. And for that reason, the National Theatre has always discussed things and represented and reflected the life of the country at large, or it did in its best days, I think.
Writers and institutions across the world, America here, in India, everywhere, is at great risk now. They're being beaten up on in some way or the other. What is the responsibility of institutions, therefore, at this point of time, to withstand the pressure that they receive from governments or those in power?
Well, you need strong, what I'm talking about, you need heroic individuals who'll go to the wall for you.
And where have they gone?
I'm not saying they don't exist, because clearly there are completely wonderful people who stand by their writers, and there are publishers who stand by writers. There are still television, a few, not many, television executives left who believe in writers. though most of all they believe in the writing room and conference and everybody writing by committee rather than the power of the individual writer. But I think there still are artistic directors of theatres who are prepared to stick it out for the writers that they really believe in. Every artistic director who goes to the Royal Court always asks me the same question, which is, what do you think the Royal Court should be doing? And I've always said the Royal Court is a very strong theatre whenever it has a writer and it is saying to the world, this is the important writer of the time, and we get behind them. And that meant for George Devine, it meant John Osborne. For Bill Gaskell, it meant Edward Bond. For Max Stafford Clark, it meant Carol Churchill. It meant we stand by this writer and we believe you have to listen to them. And you have to listen to them whether people come to or not. And once a theatre has that feeling that the whole effort of the theatre is behind a voice that it believes is fantastically important for the time, then it becomes a very significant and important theatre.
And is that the role, the primary role of theatre? To be able to provide that platform for that voice at that time?
Look, theatre's everything, as we know. You know, theatre can be, I haven't been to see the reproduction of Fawlty Towers. You know, I saw it on television. I sort of don't need to see it on the stage. Stage can do all sorts of things, like give us Fawlty Towers again, or give us J.K. Rowling again, or give us anything again, give us Strangest Thing again. It can do again, 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 and it can do again, 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 and make a lot of money doing again, again, again. But it's more exciting when it does something of its own that isn't copied from some other medium.
The magic of theatre, that formula is always so difficult to put your finger on. Is there a formula? And if so, why hasn't every theatre writer found that formula? Or will AI find that formula and here on every play will be a blockbuster?
No, the first preview is the moment at which any playwright discovers whether what they're saying is of any interest to anyone or not. You know, I've written plays where when I wrote a very successful play with Howard Brenton, the two of us wrote a play attacking Rupert Murdoch, way before anyone else attacked Rupert Murdoch. With Anthony Hopkins, it was called Pravda in 1985. And the audience started laughing before anybody said anything funny. And Howard turned to me and said, "Why are they laughing?" And I said, "I think they're laughing because they want this play. They've heard there's a play attacking Rupert Murdoch, and they really, really, really want this play. Because nobody at that point had attacked Rupert Murdoch. And as the evening went on, you sensed you were doing what I call sailing downstream. You were going the way the audience wanted to go. Sometimes I write a play about a subject that I think is fantastically important, and I just see a look of complete bewilderment in the audience's eye, where they look back at me and they go, "I can see that you think this is terribly important, but I haven't got the slightest idea why this matters so much to you." I wrote what I thought was a completely fascinating play on the subject of alcoholism, which essentially was about the argument between rational recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous believes that alcoholism is a disease and that the only way of conquering it is by surrendering your will, and you surrender your will to a higher power. Rational recovery believes that you can overcome it by willpower, and that the way to conquer it is by exerting your own willpower over it. This seemed to me the most fascinating metaphor about life. And which of these two things do people believe? I can't think of any question more interesting about human beings. I am alone. The audience was totally uninterested in this question, and except some lovely groups who came from AA, to whom thank you. But, you know, I clearly framed the question, because it is an interesting question, in a way which was not interesting to the audience. So I didn't know that until the first preview, where I sat there thinking, oh, okay, nobody's interested. And that's, every play in that way is a proposition. It's putative. It's something you're thinking and you're hoping you're going to share it and that people are going to go, oh yeah, that's my life. I understand that. I've been through that. I know that. And maybe they just stare back at you and say, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. And that, I'm afraid, I've known more than once.
You know, the odd occasion that I have time to go off and direct a play on opening night, and whenever I'm there, I go off and sit at the back and listen to everybody laughing or getting it or not getting it, and then taking copious notes and then tweaking the script. Is that something that you continuously do to be able to get the play to where you want it to be?
Yeah, I write for actors. I love actors. I was a director first. I don't think there's anything as exciting in the world to me as giving a script to an actor and seeing what they bring to it. If they're a great actor, if you give a script to Michael Gambon or Judi Dench or Bill Nye or Ralph Fiennes or any of these people, you haven't got the slightest idea what they're going to do. They're going to come up with a contribution that you have not foreseen, but which is far greater than anything you had in your imagination. It's something extra. It's their point of view about it. If you don't relish that, and if you don't enjoy collaboration, write novels, write poems, because you can write in your own voice. But I write in other people's voices. And for me, that's the pleasure of theatre, is watching them take off and give me more. Now, when they give me more, I am likely to say, you are so clear in the way you do that, I don't need you to say that. And I'll want to take lines out. On the other hand, I will see, look, clearly when you do it, it is clear to me that I am not telling the story. It is not. It happened to me the other day with Grace Pervades, which is rehearsing. And I just went, this story isn't clear. The minute you, very skilled actors, present it, I don't know what's happening here. And it was a fix that it doesn't take more than 10 minutes to fix it. But that's what actors do for you. They lay it out for you and they add to it for you. And so if you write plays, you're crazy not to love actors because they give you so much.
What about the really badly behaved actors?
The which?
The really badly behaved actors.
Well, the badly behaved actor tends, I am generalizing here, the badly behaved actor tends to be more in the movies and television than in the theatre. And they tend to be uniquely concerned with their own part rather than the whole project at large. There are certain actors, and I'm certainly not going to name them, who are...
They are named in the book.
Are they?
One particular one who sort of took off her clothes because she didn't want to listen to a particular direction, but anyway.
Took off what?
Took off her clothes.
Oh, took off her clothes. Yes, no, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't that she didn't want to listen to a particular direction, she just didn't want to listen to direction in general. So she had a nudity technique to distract you while you were trying to direct her. But by and large, it's in the movies that actors are frightened because they are stars, and a star is a wonderful thing when a star is in your work and getting large numbers of people to see your work. But a star is also a very frightened person, often, because a star is frightened about what their relationship with the public is and how the public sees them. And so it may be as simple as saying something like, I don't want to do this, it will make me seem unlikable, which is a really, a losing game, because what is likable, what is unlikable? But there's often a shading about, I don't want to represent myself. To put it at its most basic, I once had an actress turn down a part saying to me, I don't want to do this part because I'm horrible to my children. And I said, yes, in the film. And she said, but in life I'm very nice to my children, she said. So I don't want people to think I'm horrible to my children. And I said, you're really going to have trouble finding material that represents you as this wonderful saint you are, clearly are in real life, because you'll find your choices are very limited. But that is the shading that you get from a certain stars who are fearful, or stars who are convinced that they have become well known because of a particular aspect that the public enjoys about them. Whereas you will have other stars, and I can say a star like Julianne Moore, you know, Julianne will do anything. You kind of meet Julianne, and there is nothing Julianne will not do. She will break any taboo you want. And with someone like her, you just go, I can do anything, because Julianne is never, ever, ever worried about what the public thinks of her. And the result is the public has immense respect for her because of that very quality in her work, which is she's played the wildest, craziest, most depraved, crackpot people on earth. And the public loves her for it.
What makes stars legends? You said Judi Dench a little while ago. You're talking about Julianne. What makes a, not just for that moment, not a star for that moment of that film, but really a legend that you look to, a firmament in the sky, a star in the sky?
I made an unfortunate remark when I was young that has been hung around my neck for the whole of my life on this subject, which is, I said that the public responds at some level to who people are rather than what they play. And I suppose what I was talking about was the public's love of John Gielgud and the public's slight distance from Laurence Olivier. That, in other words, they adored Gielgud because Gielgud was adorable. There is, to me, one of the most moving stories in the history of British theatre is when Gielgud had been arrested in a public lavatory in Liverpool and appeared before the magistrate's court and was fined for loitering in a public lavatory. And that night he was terrified to go on stage because he said the public will just boo when I go on, because it was all over the papers that John Gielgud had been caught cottaging. And Sybil Thorndike actually pushed him onto the stage. And they pushed him onto the stage, and he was met with a round of cheering and applause from the audience, which I just found incredibly moving. And I think Gielgud was loved, and Judi Dench was loved in that way, because you can sense that Judi Dench is the most extraordinary person. And I think that does lend an extra... And Ellen Terry, who I'm writing about in Grace Pervades, was an incredible woman, just an unbelievable... And paradoxically, she had 2 illegitimate children. And when she went to the Lyceum to work with Henry Irving, she was called the Wench and the Scarlet Woman and the Snake. And yet, after 25 years at the Lyceum, she was not only the best paid woman in England, she was the best loved woman in England. And what does this tell you about the Victorians, who are meant to be so buttoned up and conventional and intolerant? And in fact, the best loved woman in England was the mother of 2 illegitimate children. Didn't seem to bother the Victorians.
Do you have a favorite of something that you have done on the stage, or somebody else has done? And in your top sort of 5 favorite plays of all time?
You mean of my plays? Well, I'll always love Plenty, because Plenty was the play in which I found my voice, and I think it was probably the great Kate Nelligan who played that part on stage, both in London and in New York, which I directed, gave one of the greatest performances I've ever seen in my life, and it remained so. And Kate has unfortunately retired from acting and doesn't act now, so Kate is a legendary figure simply because so few people saw her. I mean, that's the real key to being a legend, is, you know, not many people got to see Kate Nelligan in Plenty, but it's one I'm always going to be incredibly fond of. It means a lot to me. And obviously, when 3 of my plays were done in a day in the Olivier, Racing Demon, Murmuring Judges, and The Absence of War, and the whole day went on from 10:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, I've never lived a day like that. It was tremendously exciting.
I'm going to open it up in a second, but could you tell us, in today's really complex times, does theatre have a role, and if so, what is it? We are seeing wars around us, we are seeing hunger, starvation, lack of education, wars which have been forgotten, like in Afghanistan, and yet we keep saying that, no, the arts is important, the arts is important. This is the foundation. Why is the arts and theatre important?
Well, theatre is important if it can see what's coming ahead. I don't think there's any role for the playwright in writing about Donald Trump or things that are journalistically stale already. You know, a lot of people obviously ask me, why are there no plays about Gaza? There are no plays about Gaza because
most people in Gaza are now dead, but anyway.
Yeah, and because of Israeli censorship. You know, nobody is allowed in. I can't report. You know, I wrote Via Dolorosa, which was about Israel, Palestine, 25 years ago, but then I could go to Gaza and I could see Gaza and I could experience Gaza. Now, nobody's allowed in. So how do we report back? How does a playwright accept Palestinian theatre groups, which, not by coincidence, have been the subject of particular hostility from the Israeli army, as they always have been? And so, you know, we depend on dissidents on both sides, the dissidents within Israel and the dissidents within Gaza, to bring us any news we get about what is actually happening inside those places. So there's a lot we can't write about at the moment, much as we might wish to.
Does the playwright have a right to offend?
Oh, God, yes. I've exercised it to the full.
Questions? Amit, right in front. We'll take them in clusters. So Amit in front. No, we let everybody hear the question otherwise.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Hare.
Amit, hold it closer, please.
Yes. I had a question about Britain as it is now. Do you have any advice for a new generation of British Asian playwrights who are trying to set their plays in a multicultural Britain?
So hold that question. Do you have any advice for British Asian playwright? The one lady behind? Yeah.
Thanks, Sir Hare. I did see a BBC interview in which you quoted, you said that Macbeth's Birnam Wood, the speech really inspired you. And being a Shakespeare Studies graduate, I can't help but ask, how did Shakespeare influence your journey in theatre and film?
How did Shakespeare influence you, and do you have any advice for Asian playwrights?
Two very easy questions. The answer to the Asian thing is form your own theatre companies if you possibly can. In other words, one of the sclerotic problems of the British theatre at the moment is that it takes so long for anything to happen. And so, you know, for any ethnic minority at the moment, it just takes forever for institutional big theatres to read things. You know, I wait, and I'm a reasonably well-known playwright, and I can wait 6 weeks for a producer to read a play. And from young playwrights, I hear horrendous, you know, the literary department at the National Theatre has 5 literary managers. What the hell they are doing, I do not know. Because we used to, at the Royal Court, turn a play round in 2 weeks. Plays that came through the post, we read them within 2 weeks, we sent them back if we didn't want them, but they got read. But I think the problem for any young playwright at the moment is how long everything takes and how long it then takes to put the play on. And it's just the spontaneity that was the fun of the British theatre, read it in April and put it on in September, has gone. And I think that is the real loss. I think that it's terrible to have lost that. And it was partly lost through COVID, And it's partly lost through this sort of commercial fear that has now entered the subsidized theatre. And so, you know, my advice to any young playwright would be start your own theatre company, get your friends together, put the play on yourself, and just do it anywhere and get it seen. Invite your friends and get it seen. Because frankly, waiting for the formal channels at the moment can be a very, very, very long and heartbreaking business. It is for nearly all young playwrights I know at the moment. As to Shakespeare, what can I say? He just does it better than anyone else, doesn't he? He's wildly uneven, and there are some terrible plays, and he did write very, very badly. But whenever you go to a play of his, if you're a playwright, you just go, you clever. He's so clever. And you just get, you know, I think on a very good day, if I had a little, just one more push of inspiration, I might write something as good as Ibsen or Chekhov. I could never write anything as good as Shakespeare at his greatest. And I think what's so great about Shakespeare is the characters. In other words, I think the characterization is so genius, and it's no coincidence that he created more characters who we know, whose names we know, Falstaff, Macbeth, Lear, Romeo, Juliet, Hamlet, you know. And I do think that if you ask me what do great playwrights do, they create great characters. And they create people who become great archetypes of a certain Iago, Othello, who become, you know, forever types in our heads. And that's what I've always wanted to do, create people who are memorable as well as plays who are memorable. And I think, you know, Shakespeare did it better than anyone, didn't he? And more of those people than anyone else.
Ruth, and then behind you.
This is completely opposite of characters. This is sort of more abstract. I love the way you take a metaphor for opposing values, like the play called Skylight. How do you do that? Does it happen as you work at it, or do you have a sense of that before you start?
Does it happen as you work on it? Just hold that question, and the lady, yeah.
Hello. I wondered whether there were any subjects that you felt couldn't be written about as plays today. Subject matter that can't be addressed in the theatre.
I think there are lots of subjects just that I'm not the right person to write about. I mean, when you asked me earlier about can I give offence, and I answered facetiously, I would give offence if I produced something which was inadequate to other people's experience. Then I would give offence of which I would not be proud. I mean, just as an example, you know, there was a sort of crazy moment in which people said you weren't entitled to write about something unless you yourself had lived experience of it. And so at the time I was writing something about a Syrian refugee in Collateral, which was a television series. And because I was writing about the Iraqi refugee, I feel I do have the right to write about an Iraqi refugee, but I'd better make bloody sure that what I write about an Iraqi refugee is A, convincing to an Iraqi refugee, and B, worthy of their experience. And so when you say to me, are there things, yes, there are all sorts of things I would be very, very squeamish about writing about, because I would feel inadequate to the experience. I mean, I have many times now, not many times, several times now, refused to do anything that involves striped pajamas and concentration camps. I won't do it. I won't have people, bodies piled in concentration camps in striped pajamas. I just find it offensive. To me, it may not be to other people, but it is to me. I just find that representation so horrible and so unlikely to be done well. So a lot of the time you're thinking, can I represent this in a way which does justice to it? And that's a very, very important question. What was the other question?
When your writing process, does it come to you
about
as
two-sidedness? Yes, I know that I don't dislike agitprop. Let me be clear. I don't mind one-sided plays. I'm absolutely fine on one-sided plays. I think one-sided plays can be a breath of fresh air, but they're just not something I'm myself born to do. I'm born to write about difficulty. And Sartre, there's a great saying of Sartre, which is kind of my motto, which is, in football, the game is always spoilt by the arrival of the other team. Meaning, you can plan everything in your head, but the minute you start to engage with another human being, then complicated things begin to happen that are not what you've planned would happen. Because people are very different. And so to me, that's where drama lies. Drama lies in that, in the way nothing quite works out the way you have it in your head, because nobody's got your head, basically, if they've got their own head. And when the two heads meet, all the interesting things happen. So yes, I'm trying to get inside the head of everyone in my plays. That's what I'd like to do.
There's a number of books out there at the bookstore. Sir David Hare will be signing books later today, so please go out to the bookstore and pick them up. This is the only one I had, which is the reason I brought it here. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir David Hare.